So you're sitting in your car one day, just driving down the road and enjoying the road, and you notice your steering wheel. It's shaking a little bit. It's going like this. And you're like, what's going on? Where do I start? What do I do? Well, what you do is you put your key in your ignition, you start your car up, and you drive it to your nearest scrapyard because the thing's totaled. Okay, maybe don't do that. Your car is actually probably okay. That was a joke. But let me start by saying I'm not a professional mechanic. Most of this is just coming from experience, watching mechanics on YouTube, and just the necessity of having to do it because, I've owned old cars my whole life, and there's been times when I've had to repair things, and it has taught me what's wrong and what's right, at least in my opinion. So take it how you want it, but just realize I'm not a professional mechanic. Shaking can be issues as minor as, a lug nut being loose, the tire being worn funny, a bad alignment, snow in the tire, to as major as internal transmission failure, suspension failure, engine issues. It can be like misfiring really badly. And that brings me to another point. If you can't figure out what it is and you're scratching your head, you should probably just take it to an expert. Don't take it to a guy like me. Don't take it to your neighbor Jerry who knows what he's doing. Take it to an expert, because if you can't figure it out and you've tried messing with it, you've tried poking it, you've tried replacing things, it's gonna actually cost you more screwing around trying to find what's wrong than it will just taking it to a mechanic. If you have a good mechanic and you can afford a good mechanic and you trust this mechanic, you should probably just take it to your mechanic. But this isn't for people that can afford a mechanic or want to take it to a mechanic, or even people that don't have a reputable mechanic. Mechanic. So both these cars have a shake going on. Both my mom's car and my car. But both have completely different situations. Now, how do you start? What do you do? Well, one thing you want to do to start before you start ripping your car apart and accusing things of being broken and tearing things is check your lug nuts. I mean, honestly, you would be surprised at how often people don't retorque their lug nuts, and how often the case is that there's a couple loose lug nuts and you're driving down the road with your wheel going shakety shakety shake because you don't got your lug nuts tightened. On that subject, you want to check the tire. Feel the tire. Feel if there's any uneven wear, any grooves. Does it feel like it's worn on? Does it look like it's worn on one side more than the other? Take a look at all the tires, all the lug nuts. Check it out. Now, on both these cars, I kind of already know what the problem is. And I already checked all the lug nuts on both of them, and they're all tight. So the next thing you do, keeping in mind that if you can't afford a mechanic or you're experienced in this, etc., etc., and that is by going for a drive. But I don't want to record myself and drive, so, and it's really hard to explain what it feels like. But on this car, I am going to say that while I drive it, it feels very loose, like it wanders on the road. It just feels like it's something suspension related. It's a hard thing to describe, but like, for example, when you go on ice and you're going perfectly straight and you got winter tires and you feel your car kind of feels like it's not going straight and it's squirrely and you're going at a reasonable speed, like you're not flying through the snow, it very well could be suspension related. Well, you start jacking the car up. My next investment's definitely going to be a jack that can fit underneath my cars, because this one does not. Now once it's jacked up and chalked and the e-brake's on and all that, you want the wheel so it can spin freely, and you want to put your hand on the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position and kind of push it. If there's any play there, like if it feels loose, it's a wheel bearing. If you go side to side and there's a lot of play, that can mean like a steering component or even a bushing or something like that. But in this car, it's actually neither of those, and it's going to be kind of hard to show you guys what it is. But let me turn the wheel a little bit and we'll inspect a little deeper. It's hard to do this without a proper, well, anything, but I'll show you what I saw. We want to visually inspect all the bushings and the ball joints and the CVs, see if there's any grease coming out. So I'll show you what that entails. So you go under here and you look and see, okay, everything's, so you look under here, you get to looking, and that bushing right there, if you look, it looks like it's popped out. And if you kind of look around, you kind of wiggle, see if anything feels loose. Tie rods feel good, so the steering's good. CV axles, you kind of feel for play. It can be a little bit in and out for some vehicles, because if there wasn't any in and out play while your suspension goes up and down, the CV wouldn't be able to go in and out. But there shouldn't be much. Like this car, I literally can't get it to move. So with everything considered, you know, other than the strut, I didn't test the strut. So with all that in mind, you know, there's nothing that feels loose, but if you look under there, there is something that looks off. Like I say, that joint looks pretty messed up. It doesn't look right. So I'm inclined to believe that it's probably something suspension related. That bushing down there, well, and I guess probably that bushing, but I can't even see it. I'm inclined to believe that it is going to just need new A-arms. So you might be wondering, what do you do for the back end of the car? If you feel like it's the back of the car or the front of the car has nothing suspicious, everything's new, you're like, has to be the back. Well, you do pretty much the same thing. You jack it up, and if there's play up and down, that means your wheel bearing's gone. And also, if on all of it, on the front and the back, if the wheel doesn't rotate very nicely, that also can mean a wheel bearing. You go down and you check all the bushings and make sure they look good, make sure nothing looks bent, feel for play, and if anything has play or looks suspicious, it's probably a problem or is going to be in the future. Now, depending on the price and how the car feels, I might get new back suspension, like trailing arms and whatever those are, just in case, and get the car realigned, because it's my mom's car and I just don't want anything to go wrong with it. But now moving on to this car, this is my personal car that I drive every day, and it started shaking too. And it's a little different because I replaced the whole front end. I replaced the ball joints, the control arms, all the bushings, the roll bar bushings, pretty much the whole front end. But what I didn't replace was wheel bearings and CV joints. Now, vibrations from CV joints, they do happen. They don't tend to happen in the way that it is with this car, but I've replaced pretty much everything else. I've even replaced the clutch and the bearings inside there. So I pretty much know, and I've also actually replaced everything in the rear end and repainted everything. So how do I know that this car isn't suspension related? How do I know that it is a CV on this car? Well, first things first, I just got these tires and I just replaced pretty much all the suspension, everything in the back, and I know the lug nuts are tight, and I know all the suspension's tight because I've just rechecked it, like you should do when you do major repairs and you are a rookie. You should always recheck your bolts, make sure everything's torqued down right. Even a couple thousand miles down the road, it's a good idea. So I already did that. So I know that the shaking isn't suspension related. But I jacked the car up anyways, after I figured out it wasn't tires. And I felt for wheel bearing play in all the tires. There was no wheel bearing play. I checked for steering play in the front and just play in the back with the suspension components. There was nothing. So then I jacked the car up, and I'll show you here in a minute, but essentially I found that there's a whole bunch of play in the CV, and a little bit of play, like I say, is pretty normal, but I checked the other side and there was no play. Compared to the other side, there was a lot of play on the left. Just let me show you how much. And one thing I failed to mention actually is the struts are good on both these cars. So how you can test that real quick is you just push down, up and down, and if it keeps rocking up and down or making like a king or ting sound, then you either have a broken spring or a worn out strut, and you got to take care of that. But anyways, yeah, you go under and you check all the bushings, make sure they're intact, look good, check for play, so like see if there's much play there, which there isn't, see if there's play there, which there isn't on the inner part, see if there's play there, go to the upper ball joint if you have that, which that car doesn't, but this car does, check for play there, everything seems pretty tight. So then I went to the inner CV. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this, but essentially it moves about, I'd say, I don't know if you can see that or hear that, but moves up and down about, I would say, a good millimeter or two. And I checked the other side in comparison because, like I say, they should have some play in or out, but not up or down. But I decided to check anyways because I've heard many different views on CVs. Being in redneck Alberta, you know, Anyways, so I checked the other side, and the other side had literally zero play. It hardly moves. And the other thing about the CVs is they've always kind of looked greasy a little bit, and there's been a clunk a little bit. Like I say, I replaced even the motor mounts in this car were replaced. So there's really nothing that should be clunking other than the CVs I didn't replace. And that's another thing I want to bring up. If you're fixing something and you have to go through a lot, and there's other things that are on the way, you know, like that are on the way out or close to the repair that you're doing anyways, you can save yourself a bunch of time and money by getting that done before something else goes wrong. Because now, for me, I have to pop the ball joint that I just fixed, which may or may not go good. It usually does not. I'm not going to lie to you, especially considering we live in Alberta where they salt the roads and the roads are snow. So I'm probably going to break the ball joint I just replaced. So I'm going to have to replace the ball joint again and take apart everything I had apart already to do the clutch, to do the CVs. And it's like, if I would have done that before, I wouldn't be spending hours in the cold doing it. It would have been done and I wouldn't be driving Mom's Neon. But in a way, it's a blessing because I discovered that there's something wrong with Mom's Neon.